Hello and welcome to another video. In this one I will talk about 10 things I like about Tera in no particular order. Let's get right into it. As most of you know, there are 3 types of classes in Tera: tanks, healers and DPS. Some other MMORPGs like Guild Wars 2 or Black Desert Online don't make this distinction between classes. What I like about the Holy Trinity is that each player has a specific role to play. For example, when playing a tank, you have to worry about holding aggro and placing the boss such that the DPS players can attack efficiently and still have space to avoid attacks. As healer, you need to keep your party alive, which means you observe the other players a lot more than when playing a DPS or tank. And as DPS, you deal as much damage as possible and you try not to waste even a split second. Some of the bosses also have their own challenges for the tank, the DPS and the healer, so if you know a boss very well as DPS, you might still have trouble dealing with the same boss on tank, since some of the attacks only hit from the front while other attacks hit the back only. All of this means that the experience you have while playing different types of classes can differ quite a lot. By now, Tera is already an old game, but the graphics still look good. It obviously depends on the settings, but when they are maxed out, the world looks really beautiful. In my opinion, the amount of detail you get in dungeons and in open world is just enough for the world not to feel empty. I've never played World of Warcraft, but if I look at footage from the game, the world feels really empty. That's obviously due to the fact that World of Warcraft is a lot older than Tera though. I don't care too much about the amount of detail since it's not the most important thing about a game, but when there is not enough, it just feels like there's not much to discover, even if that's not actually true. The art style is another reason why I like how Tera looks. I was first inspired to try an MMORPG after watching Sword Art Online, so I was specifically looking for something with this style. The color palette contributes to the anime style as well. Some areas are dark of course, but in general Tera feels a lot more colorful than some other games. The character designs also play into that of course. Aliens are strongly inspired by anime characters, but even other races could have just been copied from manga or anime. The same goes for BAMs, mobs, mounts and pets as well. Some people will prefer the art style of other games because of this, but in general I think if you like anime, the graphics in Tera are probably your thing too. There are some basic types of BAMs in this game that you see over and over in open world and in dungeons. This has advantages and disadvantages. What I like about this is that you can learn the basic moves from each BAM in open world or in lower level dungeons, so when you encounter the same type of BAM in more difficult dungeons, you already know how to deal with a good part of their attacks. This means that you can focus on the new special and key mechanics, which can often be challenging enough to learn already. There are a few good examples in the current patch that come to mind right away. In Akalath Quarantine, the first boss has a lot of attacks that are similar to the attacks from the second boss in Antheros Abyss, and the last boss in AQ resembles the last boss from Red Refuge a lot. Even after running Antheros Abyss and Red Refuge over 100 times each, Akalath Quarantine still is challenging the first few times. Another example is Kalsaic in Corrupted Skynest. If you know Kalsaic very well already before you enter Corrupted Skynest for the first time, you can focus more on getting the temperature and color mechanics right, and you can deal with the regular attacks almost subconsciously. This means that you can learn the new dungeon way faster and progress your character more quickly. The reason why people spend countless hours playing MMOs is because they can play together with their friends. Being guildmaster and having built a guild that is more like a group of friends is one of the main reasons why I still play this game pretty much daily. When I first started playing Tera, I would log in, play for a couple of hours and then not play for a week. It was only after I met a few people and one of them asked me to create a new guild together that I started playing daily. I ended up becoming guildmaster pretty much right away, even though that was not the plan, but then I stuck with it and I didn't want to give up on the guild. Back then I was really shy, to the point that just randomly inviting people to the guild would make me really nervous. After leading the guild for a couple of years and always talking to people I didn't know yet, I suddenly noticed that it was becoming easier and easier, and this also carried over into the real world. So if you are really shy, even online, I highly recommend using MMO games for this purpose, and maybe becoming a guildmaster for a couple of years. As long as you try doing a good job, and you actually talk to people in your guild, you will eventually get a lot more comfortable in social situations. Tera is not an easy game, and there is a lot to learn. Once you reach the endgame, there is a steep learning curve with all the different things you need to know about, such as EP, skill advancement, gear setup and more. Of course you'll find content that is easy enough for new players, but there is also content that will challenge even experienced players at first. All those one-shot attacks that bosses have in dungeons for higher gear levels make it quite difficult to survive the first few times. Even when you know a dungeon well, you still might die to some attacks occasionally, especially if the rest of your team is quite new. The sheer amount of skills some classes have, and the way you have to chain them in order to get decent damage output, also add to the complexity of the game. This means that there is always a challenge you can take on. Even if you manage to get used to the hardest dungeons, you can always try to switch to a class that you don't know how to play well, and try to get good enough at it to run the hardest dungeons on that class as well. Tera has one of the best combat systems out of any RPG games. In fact, the combat system is probably what keeps most players engaged. The fast pace combined with the iframe mechanic just makes it so fun to play. Whether it's PvP or PvE, this combat system makes me want to improve. Player skill has a huge impact on how well you do in fights, and it is important to know quite a lot about the class you play. In fights against regular mobs or other players, it is also fun how you can control them using knockdown and knockup, stagger, stunts and pulls. It can also be fun to challenge yourself in easier dungeons, for example. Some bosses, such as the second boss in RK9 for example, can be completed without taking any damage at all. This can make the dungeons you already know by heart interesting again for a while. The first character I ever made was my ninja, and I instantly fell in love with the agility of the class. I like how ninjas get close to the boss, but have to rely on iframes to survive since they use cloth armor. Successfully iframing boss attacks using decoy jutsu is extremely satisfying too. It's nice that there are classes that are the exact opposite as well, such as Berserker for example. The variety of playstyles means that it's quite fun to try out every class, even if you have to get them to the endgame before you can really tell what the class is about. I also like how some classes are easy to get into at first, but difficult to master, while other classes are challenging at first, but once you get into them, they are really easy to play. I enjoy playing all the classes, even though I have my favorites of course. Most of the dungeon bosses have special and key mechanics that you have to learn in order to successfully complete the dungeon. For some mechanics you have to think fast, for others you have to act fast, and yet others require good coordination between party members. Sometimes it is possible to carry a player who is new to a dungeon, while in other dungeons the party will wipe if even a single player makes a mistake at the wrong moment. The mechanics make each boss unique, even though they are often just reskinned BAMs you already know. Even when comparing the last boss in Shadow Sanguinary to the Imperator from Valic's Sanctuary, you will notice important differences, despite the fact that it's literally the same boss. It is also amazing how some mechanics can be really confusing when first trying to learn them, and then once you get used to them you can resolve them within a split second. The color mechanic in Corrupted Skynest is a perfect example for this. The first few times it took me too long to figure out where I need to go, and I would die half the time because I was too slow, whereas now I instantly know where to go when the mechanic comes up. I'm not a PvP player and I never was, but the battleground called Freywind Canyon is really fun. In my opinion, it's one of the most fun things you can do in Tera. Fighting in a group of 15 players against another group of 15 players is really exciting, and if your group stays together and you have a good leader, your chance of winning is already not bad. Of course, you need to learn how to PvP first, and you need PvP gear which you can farm in other battlegrounds, but it's worth it. There's another battleground called Corsair Stronghold, which I also enjoy a lot. This one has unified gear, and you don't even really need to be a good PvP player. During your attack phase, all you need to do is climb ladders or take down gates, and destroy a crystal while avoiding getting into fights. During your defense phase, if you're a DPS player but you're not very good at PvP, you can stay on inner ladders. On ladder defense, your enemies can't really attack for a few seconds, and they cannot avoid your attacks, so all you have to do is put out as much damage as you can in a short time. Any experienced PvE player should be able to do that. You only need one experienced PvP player on each ladder to handle leaks if there are any. The last point on this list is the fact that the game is free to play. There is no subscription fee, which would be an instant deal breaker for me, but there is also no one-time cost anymore. Because of that, I was able to try the game without initial investment and see if I liked it before committing to anything. There are also no DLC, and nothing in the game is locked behind a paywall. You can of course get an advantage by spending real money on the game, but I never felt like I'd have to do that in order to be able to keep up with other players. Well, this was my list of 10 things I like about Tera. Next week's video will be about 10 things I hate about this game. And after that I will continue my series of guides for new and returning players. I also plan on making more dungeon guides, but I will have to learn the dungeons myself first, which is not so easy right now for various reasons. Anyway, let me know if you agree with the 10 points I presented in this video, and if you would add anything. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!